Be the envy of the neighborhood. 860 KKAT, where the grass is always greener. Welcome to Gardening Utah. Here's composter and show hoster, Jana Francis.
Welcome to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis. Every week here on Gardening Utah, we give you gardening inspiration and advice from experts across the state. We talk about vegetables, flowers, trees, shrubs, and of course, your lawn. Thank you for listening. I hope this show is something that you'll look forward to checking in with every week. Whether you're a beginner or an expert, Gardening Utah aims to inspire you and keep you in the know of what tasks you should be accomplishing in your yard and meet amazing, informative experts along the way. This show airs on the radio on the weekends here in Utah at 10 a.m. on 860 AM KKAT, and episodes drop every weekend on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, so hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Whether you are an expert gardener and you listen to this show to maybe get to know the experts around the state of Utah, or maybe you're a novice gardener that likes to listen to the show to learn something new and be inspired, well, I promise that no matter which you are, you will learn something or be inspired on today's show, or I'll give you your money back. Honestly, though, I'm so excited because today's show is jam-packed with information and inspiration. Today we have horticulturists Mike Lorenc and Natalie Boyak from the Conservation Garden Park. And we talk so many different topics with regard to landscaping maintenance for your yard. Whether you have localscapes or whether you're working into a localscapes or not, we talk about the proper ways to avoid weeds, to really make sure that you're spending less time gardening and more time enjoying your garden, and make less mistakes as the years go on. We'll debunk some myths with regard to landscaping fabric. We'll talk about mulch. We'll talk about weeds. We'll talk about sprinklers, whether you have drip or spray. We'll talk about plants. And I learned some really crazy new things about plants that I'm really excited about. And we're going to get into all of that in today's show. But first, you know what time it is. The tip of the week.
860 KKAT. With your Gardening Utah tip of the week.
My tip of the week is prevent powdery mildew now. Now, what's powdery mildew? Well, maybe you're looking out at your squash plants and they're starting to turn white and maybe a little bit wilted. That is cucurbit powdery mildew, and it is very common in Utah. It will show up on your vine crops, especially where plants are crowded or running together. I get it in my zinnias and sometimes cucumbers, but it's a foliar disease, and as the infection continues, the leaves turn yellow and then they become distorted. Now, the best way to manage powdery mildew in the future is prevention. Once it's occurred, there's really no way to cure the plant. You can just try to knock the infection back a little bit. And the initial infection occurs via airborne spores from neighboring plants. And it can develop very quickly once the infection occurs. And it's usually first visible on the shaded undergrowth where the leaves are dense, the light is low, and the humidity is moderate. So these infected leaves, they'll turn yellow, they'll wither, and they'll die. Now, the fruit of the plant is usually not directly affected, but the yield of the overall plant and the flavor can be reduced. Now, this disease really does thrive in humid and shady environments under moderate temperatures, usually under 80 degrees. So monitor your plants throughout the summer for infection. And if you notice any spotting or curling of the foliage or like the circular white patch on the leaves, remove those leaves immediately. It just depends on how much it is. You don't want to obviously take off all the leaves of a plant. But at the first sign of infection, you really want to remove that leaf. And at that time, you can start applying preventative fungicide sprays about every 2 weeks. Now, some people have a lot of different things that they like to try. And one of them is milk. And believe it or not, in a 2009 study by the University of Connecticut, they tested a milk treatment of 40% milk and 60% water on plants infected with powdery mildew. And what they said was, I quote, "The milk treatment provided significantly less disease than the untreated control, and the chemical treatment had equal or significantly less disease than the milk." So scientists aren't sure why milk can be so effective, but they believe that when the milk interacts with the sun, it produces free radicals that are toxic to the fungus. Now, I personally have never tried it, so I can't personally vouch for it, but I do get powdery mildew. I usually typically try to remove the leaves at the first sign, because I'm always out there looking for squash bugs too. So some other things that you can try to, as a fungicide spray about every 2 weeks to try to prevent powdery mildew. Once you do see it, there's potassium bicarbonate, there's the milk that I just talked about. Neem oil is probably the most common that you'll find that people really say that they have good success with neem oil. There's mixtures on the internet you can look up that include vinegar and baking soda and garlic and sulfur, but really you got to be really careful with baking soda and vinegar because it can burn the plant. So just make sure that whatever it is you decide to try, that you find the right mixture of that just by looking it up online. So here's other ways that you can prevent powdery mildew from being a massive problem. Number one, don't crowd your plants when you plant them. 2, try not to grow plants susceptible to it in the shade. For example, squash plants are very, very susceptible to it. And dispose of infected leaves and stems as soon as you see an early sign of the infection. And water the soil, not the plant. Many times when I'm seeing powdery mildew infections places, it's really because there's maybe overhead watering or sprays. And that's how the plants are getting watered, and that really can spread powdery mildew. And then buying mildew-resistant varieties. There really are, next spring when you are going to buy your squash, if you do have a big problem with powdery mildew, there are some pumpkin and melon varieties that are at least partially resistant. So you can just kind of have a look at the tag, and if it says, resistant to powdery mildew, that would be a good one for you. For the summer squashes, off the top of my head, I know that there is a variety called Sun Gold that some people have some good success with. Also, in the fall, be very, very careful to throw away your plant debris instead of leaving it in the soil, because the fungus can overwinter in the soil on any plant debris that's left. So really get that up in the fall and destroy all the infected plant material, throw it away. And then next spring as well, start your plantings in really good, healthy, rich soil, and then space them out further apart. And again, make sure that you're watering the plant, not the leaves.
And that's your Gardening Utah tip of the week, brought to you by the Advocates. If you're in an accident, you deserve an advocate. Call 801-355-5550 or visit utahadvocates.com. Never miss a tip for your garden and never miss an episode. The Gardening Utah Podcast with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT.
All right, shout out time. I wanted to shout out a couple of the ratings and reviews that we've got on Apple Podcast. And if you have never left a rating or a review, I would sure love you if you'd go to Apple Podcast, and you're probably listening there right now anyway. Just give us a 5-star, and if you'll take an extra second and leave a message, maybe you'll get a shout out on the show like this one. So Kimber said, "Yay, I love this. I've been listening on my way home from work, and it gives me so much inspiration to get right out into the yard when I get home. I just bought a house that needs some landscaping love, and I'm eating up all of these ideas. Thank you, Jana." Well, you are so welcome, and I hope you're hearing this on your way home, and have a safe drive and a good evening. And I also want to give a quick shout out to Ashton Allen, a good listener of ours who mentioned that he listens in his wood shop, and sent us a cool message on Instagram the other day. So again, rate us on Apple Podcast, and I love talking to you guys on Instagram. So find me at Gardening Utah, and you can send me a message, ask a question. Maybe we'll answer it on the show, but I just absolutely love chatting with listeners. So don't be shy. Find me on Instagram, Gardening Utah. And I'm also Jana M. Francis is my personal account as well, if you want to check out pictures of my garden and whatnot. All right, before we jump into this episode with the Conservation Garden Park, I wanted to mention our contest with Q&R Box Gardens. So go to the episode notes of this podcast, link over to our website where you can enter to win, or just go to 860kkat.com and hit the contest button, and you will see a link where you can enter to win a 4x8 raised garden box from Q&R Box Gardens, and they will deliver it and install it for you. So pretty insane. The value, I believe it's like $3.99 or $4.99. So you definitely want to go and check that out and enter to win, because it's an amazing, amazing deal. Okay, so we are going to be back after this break with Mike Lorenc and Natalie Boyak who are the lead horticulturists at the Conservation Garden Park. And that is Jordan Valley Water's Conservation Garden. And it showcases landscapes suited for Utah's unique climate that are not only beautiful and easier to maintain, but they're also designed to efficiently use water. And we get loaded with tips and tricks today from them. So we'll be right back after this on Gardening Utah. Stay with us.
She's more than just gardening puns and sage advice. It's Gardening Utah with Jenna Francis on 860 KKAT. Gardening Utah, available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/garden. Here's Jenna Francis.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jenna Francis, and I'm so excited for today's show. Today, I finally have the lead horticulturist from the Conservation Garden Park here with me today. We've got Mike Lorenc and Natalie Boyak. I'm so excited to have them here. You guys know, as a listener of Gardening Utah, that one of my biggest things is water conservation. It's one of the reasons why I started the show. And the last two episodes, we've really hit that hard with specifically with lawn care with Eric Marble from Chanshire Sod Farm. So if you haven't listened to that, you definitely want to go on back and learn how to either brown out your lawn or how to just make sure that you have very good water-wise practices so that you can stay green in a drought. But meanwhile, now we're going to move on to the garden beds, and we're going to learn all about some really great tips and tricks from Mike and Natalie from Conservation Garden Park. Thanks so much for being with us today, you guys.
Man, anytime, Jenna. Thanks for having us.
Tell us a little bit about you guys.
All right. Well, I'll start first. This is obviously Mike talking. So I ran printing equipment for 20 years of my adult life, and when that industry kind of faded away, I decided I want to do something different with my life, something very different. Cast around a bit, ended up at Utah State University's off-campus program for horticulture, where I took the fast track, the very, very fast track. So I finished my 2-year degree in about a year and a half, and ended up here on an internship here at Conservation Garden Park with an internship as a seasonal gardener, and liked it. And so I came back the next year and kind of had the opportunity to stick around and jumped at it. And I've been here since, and that's been about 10 years now. So.
Oh my word, 10 years. That's amazing. And what about you, Natalie?
Yeah, I went to BYU, Idaho and studied horticulture there. And my emphasis up there was actually in floral design. But a lot of the principles of design are the same no matter what part of the landscape or plants it's in. And then I also did an internship here for school and started as a seasonal gardener. And then had the opportunity to get on full time and have been here for about 5 years now.
Wow. So you two are a massive wealth of knowledge then.
I'd like to think so, and sometimes we like to think so, but we also there's plenty of us to learn. We're constantly trying to learn new things. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
for sure. Okay, so you were talking a little bit about wanting to kind of cover some of the maintenance practices for localscapes or your garden beds. Why don't you start, Mike, with some of the foundations?
All right. So I'd say some of the foundations are this. We think maintenance is best kind of thought about in the beginning and planned for. So we spend a lot of time making sure the ground is covered with mulch. So if there was one thing I would recommend to everybody, if we're doing maintenance, especially when you're talking about weeds in a garden bed, it's going to be install a drip system, cover it with a thick layer of mulch, and that is your best defense against weeds. Most people don't understand that. They're trying to figure out what spray to spray on things, and I'll be honest, like 99% of what we use for weeds here is a weed knife, and just go and get it out. But we prevent a lot of those weeds from germinating just by simply having the drip sitting on the ground or slightly below the ground and a good thick layer of mulch on top. And that is the single biggest way to get rid of weeds. So a bed prepped that way is you're already ahead of the game when it comes to getting rid of weeds in your landscape.
And when he says a good thick layer of mulch, it's about 3 to 4 inches. And when we're talking about mulch, we mean rocks or bark chips or compost, anything that goes on the soil surface that will help keep the moisture in the soil, keep it from evaporating, and help it look better than just plain dirt.
Awesome. Now, do you guys have a favorite? What do you use most there?
A favorite type of mulch, you mean?
Yeah.
So we might differ a little bit on this one. I don't know, actually. I've never asked this question, Nat. But for me, it's just compost. For me, I like thin composted, like little wood chips and grasses and leaves and really fine textured compost. For me, it works the best, and the small particles seem to weave together really well to keep the weeds down even more than the bigger chunks.
Yeah, that is one thing to note with the mulches is if you have bigger rocks or bigger wood chips or things that the weeds can get, the seeds can get down onto the soil surface more, and they have more space in between them, that's not going to keep the weeds out as much, in my experience, as having something that's really small that doesn't allow the weed seeds to get to the surface of the soil as well. I also really like the compost. I think it helps improve the soil. You do have to replenish it every year or every couple of years to keep the 3 to 4 inches of mulch, but it helps improve the soil just naturally as it breaks down and works into the soil, and helps the plants as well as helping reduce the weeds.
Yeah, I think the one part of that we might just addendum just a little bit is I think the park strips. The organic mulches out in the park strip have a tendency to end up in the gutter, and I think that drives the cities crazy. And so we tend to encourage the inorganic mulch, the gravels and things like that, out in the park strips. It just tends to not move as much. But there's one last thing I want to jump on with that, and it's not what to do, it's what not to do. There is a product out there that everybody loves to use that absolutely drives me insane. And if you got me started on a big rant, I'd do it. But for the love of all, do not use weed fabric. Please do not use weed fabric.
That was going to be my next question.
Janice agrees with this one, apparently. So,
I agree so much.
As somebody who has worked landscapes for a long time now and removed landscape fabric that has been there for 15 or 20 years and looked at the soil underneath, landscape fabric is not a product anybody should ever use at all, ever. So
I could not agree more. I did a tip of the week on that at one point, and I think I've had it mentioned over the last 50 something episodes here and there, but I don't think you can say it enough. And it drives me a little bit crazy when I see it suggested so often from user to user in Facebook groups. Well, you got to get some landscape fabric down to keep the bindweed. No, you don't. Why don't you get into a little bit of why? Because I think this is a great time to just get into that. Let's save some landscaping fabric, folks.
Yeah, let's do that for sure. So a number of years ago, I actually wrote something for the Spaces column in the Tribune. So if anybody Googled up my name and then in Spaces landscape fabric, they'd actually run across this thing. But here's the thing: you talked about it, people want to put it down to keep the bindweed down. It doesn't work. If it worked, I guess we could have the discussion about it, but it doesn't even work. So there's that. It'll work for the first 6-7 months, maybe the first year. But honestly, once that passed, enough dirt and things have blown onto the surface of this landscape fabric that it no longer is going to be all that protective anymore. Things are just going to grow on top of it. And what's more is the roots now will grow beneath the landscape fabric, and getting it out now is a big tangle. And so it doesn't even keep the weeds out. So we can't even have that. It's part of the discussion. I would say the bigger problem with landscape fabric, there's two great, big, huge problems with landscape fabric. I'll talk about one now. We'll cover the other one. But the first one is no organic matter moves through that. I know water does, and perhaps even nutrients do, but organic matter certainly does not move through landscape fabric. I've pulled up enough landscape fabric with 4 inches of absolutely stunningly beautiful soil on top and absolute cruddy, dead, barren soil underneath. That stuff is not moving is not moving through that thing. The other big thing, I'll let Nat discuss this one, but it's the holes that people cut for the trees or the plants that grow in. Yeah, go ahead, Nat.
Yeah, so when you're first putting in plants and you have the weed barrier fabric down, you cut these little tiny holes for the plants to go in, and then you never make them bigger. As the trees grow and as the shrubs grow and the perennials, and then the perennials tend to kind of grow on top and have really shallow roots now. And the shrubs and the trees eventually can get choked out by that weed fabric, and it can girdle them and not allow the nutrients to move up and down through the trunk of the shrubs and trees, which can eventually end up killing them. So there are a lot of problems with the weed fabric. The one place that we do use it at the garden is under paths and hardscape surfaces to help stabilize the soil and keep the materials where they need to be. But we never use it in the planting beds. We do have it in a couple spots where it was originally installed, and we haven't quite gotten to taking it out yet. But eventually we'll hopefully get it all out of the garden, except there are some trees that the roots did grow over the top of the soil, and now we can't get it out. And so that's always going to be a weak part of the tree, and there's nothing we can do about it. It's much better to just start without weed fabric.
Yes, and it doesn't break down.
No.
Never.
Yeah, there's...
And the one last damning thing I'll say about weed fabric is it really encourages soil compaction. It compacts the soil underneath it, which causes runoff of water. And for water efficiency, it is not good. It's one of the worst things you can do. So no, we are very fervently anti-weed fabric. Please don't ever use this product.
Unless you're putting in a pathway, right?
Right. Yes. Yep.
You're literally never going to grow there ever.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm battling a certain area of my yard that has landscape fabric, and it really, at the end of the day, does not make weeds stop. Like you said, I think I have this delicious, 2 inches of just organic matter from just leaves falling and, just perennials kind of dying over the years. It's all this delicious stuff on top that should have just leached into this beautiful soil underneath, but instead it's alive, layer, dead. And it doesn't.
And dead. No worms, no organic matter, no microorganisms, nothing. So
nothing. It's horrible. I could not agree more. Well, I've got a few more questions for you around maintenance with regard to that. We'll get to those right after this break, right here on Gardening Utah. Stay with us.
860 KKAT with Jenna Francis and Gardening Utah, where it's always mulch time. She really does have the nicest yard on the block. It's Gardening Utah with Jenna Francis on 860 KKAT.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jenna Francis, and with me today, I have the lead horticulturists for the Conservation Garden Park, Mike Lorenc and Natalie Boyak. Hey, thanks again for being here. This has been really fun.
It's been a lot of fun so far.
Okay, so I have a question for you. Before this break, we were talking about not using landscape fabric and just putting down a really thick layer of mulch. We don't need that weed barrier. However, a new trend I've noticed is instead of landscape fabric, putting down a layer of cardboard. I know there's some people that think that that's awesome and some that don't. Really curious on your take.
I'm anti sheet mulch, period. No cardboard, no newspaper, none of this. There's a couple of reasons. The first thing is it dries out and becomes completely hydrophobic. The second it dries out, it becomes hydrophobic, and now water just runs across it. So it doesn't even get wet at that point. So unless you're keeping it constantly wet, it doesn't really work. So as a mulch, if you're trying to kill grass or kill something, that's one thing, like putting on a sheet mulch. But if you're trying to use it as a mulch, the sheet mulching doesn't really work well either. And there's one thing that cropped up that we've seen with some of the online research that you see some of the people, the universities look up, and the thing that universities use to feed termites is cardboard. It attracts pests like crazy. Termites are attracted to cardboard, and so It's just, I would just stay away from the sheet molding, because the sheet mulching, it still does the same thing. It still doesn't allow much airflow. It still doesn't allow much water to pass through. So I would still stay away from those type of sheet mulches.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. And that makes so much sense. And how many times have I, even in my own bedroom, you open a box of shoes you haven't opened for a while, and there's those carpet beetles, right?
Yep, totally.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're talking maintenance practices for your localscape, your garden bed. So we've got mulch and a drip irrigation system down. What are the next additional steps that we need to know about?
I would say that one of the things to help reduce maintenance in a landscape is choosing the right plants to begin with. If you have a planting bed and you have a spot that's only 3 feet wide, don't get a plant that's going to get 10 feet wide and expect it to stay small. It doesn't know how big your space is, and it's going to want to grow to its full size. So if you have a 10-foot shrub in a 3-foot bed, then you're going to be pruning that shrub all the time, and it's not going to be fun. But if you pick a plant that fits the size of the space you have, then you don't have to mess with it as much, and you don't have to constantly be maintaining it. And then also choosing plants that work well in our environment would be another thing to consider with plant choice. That will help reduce maintenance and hopefully reduce frustration, because it can be really frustrating to have these beautiful plants that you spend a lot of money on or that you just really love, and then have them not survive. And that's always going to happen. There are always going to be plants that don't make it, but choosing things that survive in our area and do well here is going to increase your likelihood of the plant surviving. So those would be some of my thoughts on it, is choosing the right plant for the right spot, and then also keeping in mind where we live and the conditions that we have that affect the plants.
Yeah, and to go along with picking the right plant for the right spot, absolutely. I have a pretty green thumb. Natalie and I both do, but we couldn't grow a Japanese maple in a park strip, right? And people want to do this, so you've got to pick the right spot. You'd have to find, if you're going to pick a fussy plant like that, you're looking for something that doesn't get a lot of sun, nor a lot of wind, nor a lot of, barking dogs or honking horns or whatever it is the Japanese maples don't like, because they don't like a lot of things.
Not in Utah, they don't.
No, they don't. And I've seen them work, but man, when I see one that's really good and happy, I'm like, I don't know how you managed it. I think they got lucky. So we wouldn't even attempt to do things like that. So part of our trick is to plant just find a plant that works, put it in the right spot, establish it, get it good and established. I think that is probably one of the, we're discovering this out here. That is probably one of the single most important things you can do as part of planting a plant. And we've got whole classes that we teach. Nat and I teach a lot of classes where we talk about planting trees, planting flowers, and things like that. And we think a lot of the mistakes that people make with those come on that day that they planted it, and then maybe in the months after where they didn't maybe get it established properly. So, but there are some organizations around that can help you pick plants. I don't know if you ever heard of Plant Select, or the Sego Supreme. Sego Supreme is a local one here that if they put their stamp on it, it's because they really think it'll work here in Utah. Plant Select is very similar. If they've put their stamp on a plant, it's because they've tested it in all kinds of gardens all over the West, and including here. We've got a lot of Plant Select plants here at the garden. All the signs will say Plant Select on there. It'll say Utah Native if it's Utah Native as well. Out here, but if it's got the name say Plant Select on it, I don't mean to do a Plant Select commercial, but if it's got the Plant Select tag on it, they've tested it in a lot of gardens throughout the West. People like me and Natalie have reported back how the plants are doing, and if they do really well in all these environments, they'll put their name on it and then promote it as a plant. They're a little harder to get out here sometimes, but you can order them online from a lot of places in Colorado, because this is a Denver Botanic Garden, Colorado State University program. But we've tested lots of their plants, and honestly, if they put their name on it, we're like, it's got a really high level chance of surviving out here. So
Okay.
That doesn't mean they're all going to survive, but it gives them a little bit better chance.
Yeah, I promise me and Nat have killed more plants than your listeners have. So
yeah, guaranteed. Yep. I mean, when you're, in the thick of it all day, so to speak. So Plant Select, then, listeners, I will make sure to add this information to the episode notes so that if you're listening to this on Apple Podcast or Spotify or wherever you're listening to this show, you'll be able to look at the episode notes and learn about Plant Select. And then you said Sego Supreme?
Right. And that is a more local version, I think, at a Utah State University. So. Oh,
fantastic. Okay. All right. Well, I love that. So you talked a little bit about the plant selection. Just throw out, because I'm just curious, ask a horticulturist time, right? Before we go to this next break, I want you each to tell me your current favorite plant that you're just loving right now. Both of your faces just lit up.
Yeah.
That is such a hard question for me because it depends on the time of year and what plant I am currently looking at is usually my favorite. But one of my favorites is the souldancer daisy or sundancer daisy. Both names go to the same plant. And that, I believe, is a Sego Supreme plant.
Yep, totally.
But it blooms like March through November. It's super hardy, very low maintenance. It's awesome.
Fabulous. And what about you, Mike?
So, I mean, again, like I'm with Nat, I go back and forth depending on like the time of year on this one. But if I had to pick like my favorite plant, and that really is favorite plant, like right now, that wasn't 5 years ago, it won't be 5 years from now. But if I had to pick a plant that I really love right now, they're the Ito peonies. They are the tree hybrid, the hybrid of the tree peonies and the regular herbaceous peonies that have thick herbaceous stems but have the tree peony flowers on them, and they're stunning. They're not cheap; they're kind of expensive, but they are really spectacular when they're blooming.
They're awesome, and their stems are, because they're a cross between the herbaceous and the tree peonies, their stalks are a lot stiffer, and you don't have to stake them; they stay upright. Which is awesome.
I'm going to buy all the rest before our listeners find this show. I'm teasing. I didn't know this existed, so I'm kind of freaking out right now. I'm not going to lie, because now I, of course, have to have one.
Yeah, get on our website and take Natalie's herbaceous perennials class that she taught. She goes over that plant among a lot of others that work here. So.
Amazing. Okay, I can't wait to do that. And I'll put links to that as well in the episode notes as well. All right, we will be right back with more after this right here on Gardening Utah. Stay with us.
She's more than just gardening puns and sage advice. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT. 860 KKAT. With more of the fastest growing show on radio. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, hanging out here with lead horticulturist of the Conservation Garden Park. We've got Mike Lorenc and Natalie Boyak. Thanks again for being here. And before this break, we were talking about a lot of things on how to get plants established. And that was one thing that I thought maybe we should just explain exactly what that means to our listeners when you get that perfect plant and you need to make sure it gets established. What does that exactly mean?
That is a really good question. And it's a little bit different for every plant and depending on your soil type and what time of year you plant it. But new plants have a pretty small root system. So if you think about the size of pot that plant was in, that's as big as the roots are right now. And so when you're planting, you break up those roots to let them grow into the soil and fill in your hole, and then your roots are still the same size.
Yeah.
They haven't grown yet. So you need to give them extra water until they have time to send those roots out into the soil and pull water from a bigger area so that they can survive. Because when you first put it in the ground, it's essentially still kind of in its pot. It's still the same size. It still needs water. And just because the soil around it might be wet, if the root ball, the potting soil in among the roots is dry and it's within the first couple of days, first couple of weeks, your roots probably haven't spread into that more moist soil yet. And so you still may need to water that plant until it is big enough to survive. So with most perennials, usually the first season, so if you planted in the spring, I would give it extra water through the fall, more during the heat of the summer, maybe like 3 times a week during the heat of the summer. And then you can taper it off in the fall to 2 times a week down to 1 time a week. But with trees and shrubs, I do about the same for the first season. But then, especially with evergreen trees and shrubs, you have to water them through the winter as well, especially in really dry winters like this winter we just had. Every week, every couple of weeks, go out, check the soil, put your finger down by the roots and feel how moist the soil is. And then you've got to water them. Otherwise, they don't do as well. And sometimes with the trees and shrubs, you might need to give them a little bit of extra water the next year as well. Just kind of keep an eye on the plant and see how it's doing. And then, with the evergreens, I would go probably 2 years, but the second year, maybe just once a week, once every couple of weeks through the summer, and then again that second winter.
Yeah, it takes time to get trees established, especially woody plants like trees, but they're long-term investments. So it's really good protection for a long-term investment. So
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so that makes sense. And so when we talk maintenance in the landscape, we've covered mulch, we've covered drip system, and we've covered plant selection. Mike, talk to us about water.
Water is important. So a couple of things that we teach here is, so I think when people think of watering, they think of overhead spray, like the standard old spray heads. And I think honestly, we need to be getting away from those type of things. When this garden was built in probably 2001, I think we thought about things a lot differently back then. I think we thought it was more about plant selection or a few things like that. But now I think we know that honestly, when it comes to water efficient landscapes, it's all about how we water it. In fact, it really is a large part about how we water it. And so we're slowly kind of taking out a lot of the old spray heads that are in the shrub beds or in the perennial beds. We're finding that they get blocked really easily. So the second something gets big, now what's beyond that doesn't get covered anymore. We're finding that it transfers pathogens pretty easily. So we get diseases in our shrub beds way more than we do in the areas where we've got the drip system set up. So it's just kind of a battle when it comes to the some of the pathogens that move around in that water.
I was just going to say that spray heads also tend to lead to more maintenance weed-wise in the planting beds, because now with your thick layer of mulch, the weed seeds are on top of the surface. And if you're spraying the area with spray head irrigation, overhead irrigation, then those weed seeds are getting watered. And now they have a great time germinating and growing because that's what they want. They want water, they want sunlight. But if you're using drip irrigation under 3 to 4 inches of mulch, then the weed seeds, after the first couple of years, you just still need to weed and maintain it. But after those first couple of years, the weed pressure goes way down because the new weed seeds are now on top of the mulch and the water is underneath. So they're not getting as much water and not surviving as well.
Yeah, and when it comes to like just taking care of plants in the bed, like having it on the drip system is one of the big things. Keeping the ground covered. Don't disturb the ground. So don't rough up the ground, and this includes intentional, like leave the tiller in the garage. I'm not a big fan of like incorporating organic. Janet seems to agree with this one. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of incorporating organic matter into the landscape. It'll work itself in there. Just keep it covered and it'll be fine. So in a lot of ways, I've just made you guys' job easy. Cover it up, but don't till it in. Don't do a lot of crazy things, because all that stuff will just bring the weed seeds that are 4 inches underground, not bothering anybody, up to the surface, and now they're up where they're getting light and air and water. So just let them stay down there. Yeah, and really, like, just walk out and look at the way things are being irrigated. If you have a spray out in a bed, just look at seeing what's being blocked, what's not getting because of that blockage. Installing a drip system underneath kind of solves a lot of these issues, and actually just makes it a lot more hardy long term, and with the diseases that we've seen out here, and plenty of times like get transmitted through the spray head. We've got a few plants that we've been fighting a few diseases on, but we go to the areas where they're on the drip, and either it's very, very little or none. Wow. And it's the same flat plant 100 yards away. So we more and more we're taking out the spray inside the shrub beds and replacing them with and converting it over to drip. So and those are some big ones. The only thing we overhead spray here at the garden is lawn or lawn alternative type of thing. So the lawn, the thyme lawn, which is actually just like creeping thyme or woolly thyme that we'll do, or the Turkish Veronica, things like that we have we're kind of using as a lawn in spots. We'll overhead water those because they're an 1/8 of an inch tall total. Yeah. But those are the only areas that we do that kind of thing with. Here, everything else eventually, when we have it done our way, will be all on the drip system. So
that's so fantastic. I've got a little converting to do myself. So, well, while we're at it, why don't you tell our listeners when they can come visit? Give us the whole scoop on the classes and all the resources that you guys have at the Conservation Garden Park.
Okay.
Yeah, we teach live classes. We're starting to get back to those this fall.
Slowly, but yeah, we're getting back to it.
Awesome. We also, because we were doing them online, we recorded them, and now we have them on our YouTube channel. So you can get to it through the conservationgardenpark.org website or through YouTube, and then search for our channel. It's just Conservation Garden Park. So there are a lot of classes on there. There are the localscapes classes on Teachable that are also available, and we have an irrigation class in that format, as well as a couple on the YouTube channel. We are open currently from 8 to 8 Monday through Saturday. The hours change based on the time of year. So, but the hours are listed on our website. And
it's free. It's free to the public. Like keep in mind, everything we do out here is free. There is no charge. So this is just us trying to encourage this landscape that saves water. We are Jordan Valley Water's Conservation Department. So this is what our job is, trying to reduce how much water the district is selling, which is an odd business format, but they're very smart over there, and they know that conservation is way cheaper than trying to dig up more water sources or divert rivers for further. So this is just way better, more economical in the long run.
Absolutely. I'm going to put all of those links in the episode notes for our listeners, so that there's so many resources, and you guys do such a great job. And I can't wait to come and check it out too.
And I know you've taken one of the classes, or at least that's how this whole conversation started, because you were looking at taking, I think it was Natalie's irrigation class. So
yeah, absolutely. So, and we've had Cynthia B on the show as well. So listeners, if you want to go back to episode 43, Cynthia B also talks a lot about localscapes and how you can design the most perfect waterways yard in your landscape. So listen, thank you so much to Mike and Natalie for being here today. Can't wait to have you guys back on the show, and hopefully our listeners will come on out to the Conservation Garden Park and check it out.
Yeah, make sure you say hi if you do.
When you're ready to grow big or go home, Make your neighbors green with envy. Get the Gardening in Utah podcast, Gardening Utah, available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/garden.